in the course of our civilization. Quite independently of deism and its particular claims, however, it is important to note that there always is a recurrent conflict and tension in the West between the God of the philosophers, so often identified with the most general and with the most universal characteristics, and the God of the pious who want to stress the historical intervention of God in particular ways. Thus, there were many pious at the time and well thereafter, and indeed in the 17th century, who looked upon St. Thomas Aquinas and his systematic theology as a threat to the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Christ on the cross. This seemed incomprehensible to disciples of St. Thomas Aquinas, but the philosophical rendering of God in general and universal and abstract terms has always caused uneasiness among the pious. But deism, above all else, is a conflict between two notions of God himself. The God of the deists on the one hand, and the Judeo-Christian Jehovah and the Trinity of the Christians on the other. That involves deists and Christians in absolutely fundamental debates about the nature of knowledge of God, and indeed about religious knowledge and its implications. If we look at the issue of knowledge of God, for the Christian, there is much that is known about God in nature. There is a broad realm of natural theology. Almost all Christian theologians agree that we know about the existence of God through nature. We are not dependent upon revelation for that. We know a great deal about qualities of God, his power, his wisdom, his goodness through nature. We are not dependent upon supernatural revelation for that. And Christians debate the limits of natural theology, but Christian theologians all agree upon the insufficiency of natural knowledge alone. Knowledge of God through nature does not lead one to the satisfying and deep understandings of divine mystery that can be achieved through supernatural revelation, and knowledge of nature does not lead one to an understanding of Christ, the Trinity, and the mystery of human redemption. For the deist, God is manifest to us by nature, his creation, to our senses and our understanding alone. One knows God from the ability to study what God has made, created, and done. On the crucial issue of God's love, Christian theology will argue with many an internal debate that there is much that is known about God's love for mankind through nature alone. How look at the cycle of rainfall, crop growth, evaporation, rainfall, and not see the wisdom, the love of God in these? But the ultimate act of divine love for the Christian, that God so loved the world that he became incarnate as the Son Jesus and died on the cross to offer redemption to mankind. that most crucial knowledge of God's love is absolutely dependent upon revelation. The deist believes that God so loved the world that he created it with the means of redemption always present in nature, always at hand, there to be discovered and known and applied. That is a striking difference in perception of divine love. On the subject of the creation, almost all Christian theologians of the 18th century agree that God created the world in 6 days and on the seventh rested as described in the book of Genesis, and that creation occurred some 6,000 years ago, and that God created Adam and Eve, who are the first human beings from whom all human life has descended. For the deist, God is the creator of the material universe. God is the author and architect of the exquisite and extraordinary Newtonian world order. He is the author of the laws of nature. When that creation occurred, and in what modes the world moved from that creation to what we now observe and to human life, these, for the deist, are matters of science and natural knowledge. One of the most profound and intense and interesting debates between Christian and deist in the 18th century is over the relationship of God to the creation. The Christian believes in particular providence, that God has entered into particular relations with the creation, above all with mankind. The deist believes in general providence alone, that God engages only in universalistic relations with his creatures. Let's think about this for a moment in ordinary 20th century terms, because the distinction between particular and general providence is easily seen from ordinary life. Someone is late for a plane, held up in traffic on the Beltway or the Long Island Expressway, and the plane crashes. And the person is interviewed by the media and says, "Thank God, God must have a special purpose for me." That is a belief in particular providence, in particular relations. In such a view, God, in effect, said, Smith on the plane, Jones on the plane, O'Brien on the plane, Krajewski, I've got plans for you, let's get traffic on the Long Island Expressway. God engages in particular providence, particular relations. Any belief in the power of prayer to alter natural events is a belief in particular providence, that God enters into particular relationships with the creation. Someone you love is ill, and you offer a prayer to God not to let that person die. The person lives. If the purpose of that prayer and the conclusion you draw from the outcome is that there exists a course of nature according to which your loved one would have passed away, but there exists a being capable of altering the general laws of nature, who, hearing your prayer, chose to intervene in the course of nature and alter the natural sequence of a disease. If someone, after months of planning, prays for sunshine at tomorrow's benefit picnic, what they are expressing is a belief in particular providence. All propitiatory prayer presupposes a belief in particular providence. Not prayer of thanksgiving, right? But prayer in which one requests, one propitiates God, requesting an alteration of things. So for the benefit picnic tomorrow, one says that night in prayer, "Dear God, don't let it rain." One is expressing one's belief in particular providence and particular relations of the deity to the creation. Absent your prayer, the natural course of nature would have produced clouds and precipitation. As a result of your prayer, a being, God, who is capable of altering the course of nature, altered that natural sequence, creating the sunshine, or the test of your faith if it rains, the sunshine from which the picnic benefited. The deist denies particular providence and particular prayer, and thus particular providence and particular relationships of the deity to the creation. And thus, very dramatically, the deist rejects the power of prayer to alter the course of nature. Similar for the deist-Christian debate is the issue of revelation. For at the very heart of Judaic and Christian belief is the conviction that God engaged in a particular revelation to the Jews, and an historically particular but universally available revelation to Christians through the Scripture and the operations of the Holy Spirit. For the deist, such particular revelation, just as in the case of particular providence, is unthinkable. The deist frequently will frame the argument, how could it be that a true relationship with God depends upon the accident of birth? For what are most people? If born in a Hindu household, Hindu. In a Muslim household, Muslim. In a Presbyterian or Catholic household, Presbyterian or Catholic. Is that the means that God would choose to reveal himself? If one believes in particular relationships between God and the creation, particular revelation poses no problem, and it's judged on the basis of one's sense of its religious truth. For the deist, the category itself of particular revelation is ruled out of the intellectual court. God, being the universal God of all the creation, has revealed himself universally through science and nature, accessible to all mankind. On the question of religious belief, Christian theologians in the 18th century argue that there is much belief that is acquired through natural knowledge, but that there is a particular category of religious belief, which is acquired through faith, though that knowledge acquired through faith is by no means necessarily contrary to reason and to evidence. The deist rejects the entire category of any religious belief acquired by means other than evidence and reason alone. And thus, the deist rejects the entire category of religious faith. This will pose an interesting subject of debate between Christian and deist. For the Christian will claim that one of the sets of empirical evidence that the deist is ruling out is the empirical evidence of religious experience, of subjective religious experience, of people who experience the fruits of grace. For the deist, someone claiming religious experience on the basis of a private, subjective, non-replicable experience would be in the position of someone who said, but I know this scientific theory is true, not because you also can experience it, but because I've experienced it with such intensity and conviction, and it has changed my life. But the problem of what to do with religious experience looms large for deistic critics of belief through faith. And they almost invariably develop categories of delusion or enthusiasm or superstition, and so often here we have two intellectual communities that simply talk past each other. The Christian saying, you claim to believe in knowledge gained by experience, but here is direct religious experience in the lives of so many people. And the deist saying, no, those are moments of enthusiasm, moments of deliria, moments of superstition or passion or emotion. What experience is that acquired by the natural human faculties from the study of nature. The Christian also believes that God is a being who intervenes in the creation and who intervenes in the course of human history. God intervenes to achieve his perfect will in an imperfect nature, because nature, not being God, cannot be perfect. And it often needs for God to achieve his perfect will, his intervention in that nature. And thus, most Christian theology in the 18th century will stress to various degrees the reality of miracle, the reality of prophecy, of gifts of the Spirit. Christian theologians will see human history as providential, as reflecting the loving interventions of God. Christians attuned to the new philosophy believe that secondary causes, the laws of nature indeed constitute the usual course of things, that the laws of nature indeed account for most of the phenomena that we observe, but that God, as author of those laws of nature, is free to leave them operative or to suspend them to achieve this or that end, or to alter them when it is his will to do so. For the deist, God does not intervene in nature or history. This would contradict the perfection of creation. God is not like a human being who creates something and then has to fix it. God's intentions will be fulfilled through the operation of that which God brought into being, the creation of nature. God's will is immutable. Human beings change their mind. I'll alter this, I'll alter that. But one cannot be anthropomorphic with God. God is unchanging. The history of the world is only providential in an ultimate sense. That is, that God created nature and the natural human history that natural human beings live out in order to achieve His will. And in the ultimate sense, history and nature are providential. But God's will is manifest in the laws of nature, and He does not intervene. Deist and Christian also disagree profoundly about issues of the goal of human life. For Christian theology, ultimately, the goal of life is the glory of God and the salvation of the soul. There is a world to come, and transcending the importance, though that importance be very great, of the things of this world, there is an ultimate destination of a human soul in the eternity of hell, or the eternal blessedness of heaven. Christians throughout the 18th century increasingly rehabilitate their notion of nature and human nature, increasingly validate the pursuit of happiness as one of those providential secondary causes, natural laws of God, by which most things indeed fulfill God's plan and purposes. But for the Christian, there is always an ultimate world. And that ultimate world and the glory of God and the salvation of the soul are always the essential goals of life. For the deist, the goal of life is given to us by God's natural revelation of the mechanisms of nature. And it is happiness on earth. That is a moral goal given to us by God, from God, in the very natural mechanisms that govern our behaviors and our desires. For deists, and they disagree often passionately on the subject, there might or might not be an afterlife in which the virtuous are particularly rewarded. It troubles some deists that while virtue in general leads to happiness, there are the wicked who prosper, and there are the good who suffer in this world. And the deists frequently will argue that there may be an afterlife in which the virtuous are particularly rewarded, but this does not alter the goal of life, and deists are virtually unanimous in their consensus that there is no hell, that the notion of eternal anger, of eternal damnation, of eternal pain would contradict the goodness of God. Deist and Christian also debate the problem of evil, both physical evil in the universe, earthquakes, floods, droughts, tornadoes, and evil in the human world, our wickedness, the harm that we do to each other. For the Christian, physical evil is, in the final analysis, incomprehensible. And the question remains Job's question: who is man to question God? And ultimately, one is reconciled to the world by faith, though there is a growing movement of attempts philosophically, we shall see, within Christianity to justify what appears to be evil in the physical universe. Deism is committed to a philosophical optimism in which the things that we call physical evils are, in the final analysis, an illusion. For knowing that God is the author of this world, we know that all things contribute to the general good. That if we say, this should not be in the universe. If I were creating the universe, I wouldn't have put bees in there. We are putting ourselves in the place of God, who surely knew, as a perfect being, what he was doing in the creation of this extraordinary world. And the more we learn about things such as bees and their function and why we want them to have stingers to keep themselves alive as a species, the more we see that what we think of as physical evils are in fact things that contribute to the general good. As for human wickedness, the Christian generally argues throughout the 18th century that Adam's fall from grace accounts for human wickedness, that we are bearers of original sin. For the deist, there is no original sin. Wickedness makes us unhappy, and in fact, by nature, we wish to be happy, so wickedness is contra natura. It is against nature. It is an aberration. It is like jumping off a cliff in the belief that you will not fall. Man is ignorant, and the more that we know, the better that we shall be. We are deceived and misled rather than wicked. These views play naturally into the Christian deistic debate about morality. Although, as noted, there is a growing tendency, above all in Protestantism in the 18th century and anti-Calvinism, that takes a more positive view of human nature, Christian theology ultimately will argue that human beings have fallen beyond the means of self-redemption, and that there is a need for a grace outside of nature, a supernatural grace, for us to fulfill our highest possibilities, which are those of acting from charity, from love, and from faith. For the deist, human beings are morally self-sufficient. They possess providential, natural instincts, and indeed, for most deists, a natural moral sense. Our goal as natural creatures is to fulfill our heart's desire for happiness, and the things that are conducive to real human happiness are also those things that bring about mutual human understanding and brotherhood and peace and decency. Thus, for the Christian, if one asks, what are the secular requirements of moral achievement by human beings? Those secular needs are 1, restraint, and 2, religion. Given original sin, given the wickedness of human beings, there must be profound restraints placed upon the human ability to do harm, and given the indispensability of religion to human redemption and goodness, it is one of the secular functions of the state to preserve true religion and to protect people from religious errors that would deny them the means of their redemption and their moral achievement. For most deists, since in fact we will our happiness, and the means to our happiness include a peaceful and decent and safe and humane society, the secular need for moral achievement is enlightened self-interest and allowing our natural human instincts to develop in their fullest freedom. In these issues, some of the profoundest debates of our civilization are born. Thank you very much.